This is astrologer Dikki-Jo Mullen in Orlando, Florida, with a really intriguing horoscope to discuss with you. A good way to learn astrology is to look at the horoscopes of eccentric or interesting people, whether they're individuals we might know or whether they are celebrities. And recently, on my birthday, I received a gift from a good friend and a birthday card, this little booklet, Steps Toward Inner Peace, the story of Peace Pilgrim. And Peace Pilgrim was a lady who was a mystic and who lived in the 20th century. And her whole life story was so intriguing that I just had to prepare an astrological program to share with everybody. It's an inspiration and just also a very, very interesting life. Let's see if we can begin. Some slides for you to look at. Peace Pilgrim was born in Egg Harbor City, New Jersey on July 18th, 1908. Her family had a poultry farm and she had kind of an affluent early life and protected but unremarkable childhood. She did very well in school and was even the valedictorian of her high school class. And at that time, there were only 3 career opportunities open to most women: a nurse, teacher, or secretary. Peace Pilgrim selected work as a secretary, and at that time she was Mildred Lizette Norman. And she worked and had an early career started. She met in a normal way a man by the name of Stanley Ryder, who was a ne'er-do-well and charming Irishman. And she was completely smitten by him. Her family and friends begged her not to marry him, but love is blind. She did anyway, and the marriage was a complete disaster. She decided to get a divorce under her Saturn return at just about age 29 or 30. This is Peace's natal chart right here. And the Saturn return is a very famous transit. It occurs 2, possibly 3 times in an average lifetime, and it's always a major turning point. And so at her Saturn return, there's her Saturn in Aries, a new beginning, an adventure started. Getting a divorce at that time was a really big deal. In some states, one even had to have a jury trial, and you were considered a real bad one, especially a woman who was divorced around that time period. And so Peace left her job as a secretary and went through a major change. She began to do volunteer work with the Quakers to help the elderly and the destitute, especially women. She joined an International Women's League in 1953. She became a vegetarian and gave up coffee, white sugar, and flour decades before all of this became really fashionable. She went through a 15-year preparatory period until she reached age 45. And astrologers will know that that is about the time of the Uranus opposition to its natal place. Her Uranus was in Capricorn at birth, and in 1953, when her life changed, it was transiting Cancer. And her sun sign, born on July 18th of 1908, was Cancer. That's the familiar zodiac sign everybody knows. And she also had Neptune, the mystical planet, Mercury, the mind, and her natal moon node, which showed that there was a tendency for her to react to eclipse patterns that year throughout her life. And her Venus was in Cancer. If you'll see the little R symbol there, her Venus was retrograde. Venus is love, of course. The mythological archetypes describe the actual meanings of the planets in the chart. And she did have a very turbulent situation with love that really defined her life. The other retrograde or are has to do with the moon node, but that's always a retrograde cycle, so that's kind of a non-issue. Her Mars, her energy planet, was in Leo at birth. Her Jupiter, the planet of adventure, growth, expansion, was also in Leo. She had a couple of Aries placements, as I mentioned, her Saturn, but also her Moon, her emotions, and family life, sense of roots. And Aries often shows a sort of a rootlessness, wandering quality, adventure, unexpected qualities. And opposing all of that Cancer was her natal Uranus in Capricorn. And on New Year's Day of 1953, she was living in Pasadena, California. She had moved to different parts of the country with the Quaker unit and with doing her volunteer work and so forth. And her pilgrimage of peace began at dawn on January the 1st, New Year's Day of 1953. At that point, Peace Pilgrim left all of her possessions behind. She wore a tunic and changed her name from Mildred to Peace Pilgrim, had Peace Pilgrim across the top. And in her the pouch or her carrying bag, she had just a comb, a toothbrush, pen and paper, and a whole bunch of flyers that described that she was walking for peace. And she began her walk at the Pasadena, California Rose Bowl parade on that day. And she just kept walking. Let's look what was going on. There was a full moon in Cancer, the sun and rising in Capricorn that morning at dawn. She was seen just walking away in the mist. And the moon was separating from a conjunction with transiting Uranus. And Saturn and Neptune and Libra were opposing her Aries placements. And that represented just breaking away from the status quo. At that time, Mars in Pisces was trining her Cancer placements, which gave her energy and vitality to begin the walk. And Venus was transiting Aquarius, which showed the humanitarian quality to her mission, and also the very original kind of eccentric way she expressed love. Her Mercury in Sagittarius showed a tendency to look at the broader picture rather than to be bogged down by the details of what she might be doing. And that's the way she looked partway through her mission. That's all she had. And she had no money at all. She had sworn off money at that time. And she was a very good speaker. She, in addition to being class valedictorian, she was captain of her debate team. And she managed to convert enough people at that time to her mission of peace so that they almost always would offer her food. She seldom missed a meal, and she seldom needed a bed to sleep in the night. She wandered for another Saturn return 28 years from the time that she began her mission. And she crossed the country 7 times and walked well over 25,000 miles. And then she stopped counting and still began to walk further and further. She became a member of the Appalachian Hall of Fame. She walked the entire Appalachian Trail in a single season, which is quite remarkable. She was 25 when she married under the time of her Jupiter return. And so the planet Jupiter affects her very strongly. Jupiter, the largest planet, is growth and expansion. And then was just married a few years until her Saturn return began this. Some astrology notes here. Her message was all about pure, true love. And looking at her natal chart again, She had Venus conjunct Mercury, which was very eloquent, well-spoken about love. And this grouping of planets called a stellium is really the key to understanding this extremely original person. Neptune conjunct the Sun has a lot to do with visions and with sacrifice. And she very much preached the idea of a vision of peace for the world. And there was a very spiritual, mystical quality to her life overall. Ironically, Peace Pilgrim died in an accident. She began, there's her pilgrimage chart again, and her death chart is interesting. She was in Knox, Indiana, visiting a longtime friend, and she accepted a ride to go to speak at an event. She spoke at churches, she spoke at college campuses, private groups, and different civic and social organizations. So her early ability as captain of the debate team and valedictorian showed she was really a brilliant, exceptional person, but this wasn't apparent to a lot of people until they got to know her well. At any rate, she was on her way to such an event, and she was killed in a car accident, which is just absolutely intriguing. I think that the irony, she walked all those miles and she died at this time. And it was under a Jupiter return cycle that was starting. So that shows how the Jupiter return, which was just before her marriage, probably during the courting period, and just when this whole situation was kind of unfolding and taking place. It's just a very, very interesting chart to look at. At the time that she was killed, around 7 in the evening, I used its approximate, Neptune was in the 12th house, which is mysterious circumstances. It can represent there being hidden factors at work. Mars was near her natal Pluto, which is in Gemini in her birth chart. And the planet Mars can figure very prominently in death charts. And she also had a strong cardinal affliction going on. At the time of her accident, Jupiter, the moon, Saturn, and Pluto, all in Libra, were opposing her Aries influences and squaring her Cancer sun, and also her natal Uranus in Capricorn. So the cardinal situation showed it happened immediately, unexpectedly. She probably left the planet very, very quickly and had fulfilled her mission. Her empathy with the human race and her impact as a pioneer is still explored today. There are websites, groups that follow the path of her life. Her autobiography has been translated into many languages, and her whole life mission is very much an inspiration during these times of personal and planetary change. In the year 2020 and beyond, all of the old values, the situations that have defined our lives so far are ending and beginning. There's different situations coming up, and the most adaptable will be the people who do the best. And Peace Pilgrim's example can be helpful. Not that we all have to walk across the country 7 times and wander off with only a toothbrush and a comb and some writing materials and circulars, but it's a good idea to think of values changing, being mobile and on the move, not being afraid to give up the past, to make room for a greater future. This is Dikki-Jo Mullen in Orlando, Florida, hoping you've enjoyed this little study in astrology. I do offer natal birth charts, readings, speaking engagements about astrology and metaphysics. And for those who are interested, I can be contacted on the internet at Sky Maiden Musings, Skymaiden Musings. That's my website. And skymaiden@juno.com would be my email. And a salute, a hail and farewell to Peace Pilgrim. Mildred Lizette Norman was quite a lady, quite an inspiration. The more reading about her and studying her life, you'll probably discover some other inspirations and quite intriguing ideas.